Welcome back to the High Performance Gym. Today I'm having a conversation with Dr. Bernadette Dancy. Dr. Bernadette Dancy is the founder of Stress Ed, a company delivering CPD accredited training and stress management for health and wellness professionals. She's also a stress and burnout coach with 8 years experience working with performance-driven individuals to recover well and thrive under pressure. Bernie has collaborated with leading brands and organizations including ASICS, The Run Channel, Astra and GSK. Today we're talking about stress as a superpower, cortisol as the energy switch, and why burnout shows up differently, especially in neurodivergent brains. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the High Performance Gym, Bernie. Great to have you on today. So just for anyone listening there, we're going to be talking about stress and the importance of stress, what people think maybe what stress is, what it isn't, why it's important, because the main thing that we do get with this podcast is to give people context. And that's what we're going to do throughout this podcast. We're going to give examples. We're going to give context to everything we're talking about. Because to me, I think stress is a really important topic. I love the topic myself, and I think it's really misunderstood. But I think it's essential, both for parents and for kids. So welcome to today's podcast, Ben.
Hey, Kira, you doing all right?
I'm good, thank you. Have you had a good day?
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, I must say from the start, if anyone hears drilling, I'm not on a building site. My co-working space has a bit of recording in the background, so it's testing my stress levels. But otherwise, I'm really well. It's great to be here and chatting to you.
Cool. So can you just give us a little bit of what you do, Bernie?
So the way I guess I'd describe myself as a stress management specialist. I'm always really reluctant to say expert, and I leave that to other people to decide, purely because I feel like I'm still learning. But as a stress management specialist, predominantly on a day-to-day basis, I coach people on a one-to-one basis around stress management using lifestyle and mindset approaches so that they can enhance performance. So that's quite therapeutic lifestyle management stuff, and that's predominantly online, one-to-one. A lot of my clients are far and wide. But mainly I'm an educator as well. So for me, I'm really driven by behavior change through education. So I spend a lot of time in corporate talks around gyms, private kind of wellness spaces to help people understand what stress actually is. And this year we're moving my business Stress Ed into training, some more CPD training in the health and wellness space. So to, I guess, share what I've learned in the last 8 years as a stress management specialist and coach. I've had to pretty much be self-taught, beg, borrow, steal, dive into the research and learn from many other incredible experts. So we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, I really believe. So that's what I'm kind of doing. But that probably comes from the fact that my background was in education. So I spent 15 years as a lecturer in sports science and health and exercise psychology before I became a stress management coach. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. So I think when people hear stress management, it's almost like we all know that it's that we should manage our stress, but what does that actually mean? Like, what does it mean to manage your stress? Is stress a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Can you give us some a context to what stress management is?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess for me, stress management, I'd rather the term harness the stress, because I really don't think anybody can manage stress. I always say to people, I might be a stress management coach, but not even I am not affected by stress. Fundamentally, stress affects all of us. So, we actually need a stress response in order to survive. And I think we've demonized it. I think it's become a quite easily marketed thing, especially I would say since lockdown. Prior to lockdown, I was kind of shouting into the wind a little bit with the work that I did. Not entirely, but definitely since lockdown, it became more sought after. People were more stressed. And so for me, stress management is essentially, first and foremost, understanding what stress is, because we have this kind of presumption that it's a psychological weakness. Often we all say, oh, I'm so stressed, it was such a stressful day. But that's only a fraction of what the stress response is about. And then once we've understood what it is, it's about then managing it, because we don't want to eradicate the stress response. We all need it every single day. We need the body to respond to a demand or to whatever we're experiencing. We need to harness it. So we need to allow it to come on and off. If we're living in a stress response state, it then becomes chronic. And that has multiple implications for every system in the body. So long-term stress response can change us metabolically, reproductively, digestive system gets affected, immune system gets affected. There's so many long-term implications for that because we're not simply not designed to live in a stressed state. The body is designed to, the stress response to come on for us to deal with the stressor goes away, and homeostasis kicks back in and we come back to normal. Fortunately, society is set up in a way that we are all perpetually bombarded by demands. And so we can get stuck in a stress response. So for me, stress management is kind of, how do I help people? How do we help each other? How do I help myself to make sure that that stress response has an opportunity to work at its best, to be optimal, and then switch off. So switch on, switch off as best it can. And that really is what I try and help people to do. And if you do that, all of the literature says, we're going back to the 80s when we first started talking about overtraining in elite sport. If we manage the stress response, we are essentially managing performance, because optimal health and performance can't happen unless we're in a really balanced state.
So you mentioned something there, and I just want to kind of pull back a little bit for anybody listening. You mentioned homeostasis. Can you just explain what homeostasis is? Because what I feel this would give a really good context to then build on that. So how would you describe homeostasis?
So homeostasis is a biological term. Homeo meaning body, stasis meaning balance. So what we're saying is that our body's in balance, really, in simple terms. Now, balance doesn't mean rigid, because actually balance means in flux, a nice state of flux. And I would liken it to a bit like, if you think of a football player, a tennis player, right? You want to be on your toes. If you're a sports person, if you're flat-footed, you're at a disadvantage, right? So you're not able to respond and react as efficiently as you might, as quickly as you might want to. So really what we're looking at is helping the body to be able to respond and adapt. Now, in homeostasis in the body, there's quite a, not narrow window, but most systems within the body will have a window where we work optimally. And that would be our temperature, our blood pressure, our heart rates, that kind of thing, right? Our pH. And there will be a level at which we will thrive and survive well. Now, ideally, simply, the body is very basic. It's very complex and fascinating in many ways, but fundamentally what we're striving to do is keep us in balance, and it will always be working. Mine is working really hard at the minute to bring everything into balance, right? So yours will be, but we can't feel it. It just happens. That's the brilliance of the human design, right? So even when we feel like we're doing nothing, our body will be working from a metabolic point of view. Hormones are working, neurotransmitters are working in the background to bring that nice balance about. So really, wellness is creating the environments, the workplaces, the sporting environments, so that there's much opportunity for us to stay in that balance. Now, here's the thing. If we only stayed and did those things and sat around and doing nothing, actually, we wouldn't reach optimal state and we wouldn't thrive, or we wouldn't necessarily grow. So the beauty of the human body is it likes us to move into what we call kind of good stress. You'll hear banded around in social media and stuff. It likes us to be challenged and stretched and stressed, but equally we'll come back to normal, and the body will adapt. So it will learn from those experiences, and it will enhance us physiologically and metabolically, so that we're able to deal with stress that comes at us from work or an exam or whatever. So to build ourselves to be optimally well is we want to get that nice balance of stretch or strain and rest and recovery.
Because the way I see stress is, and I think, let me know if this is like a fair example. I see stress, but stress is it's associated with cortisol, and I'm sure you can kind of explain how that is. I see cortisol as energy, is more so like the energy hormone. It's kind of, I know a lot of people say it's a stress hormone. I think when you call it the stress hormone, I remember when I first got into personal training, the thing that you had to do is, if you wanted to build muscle or lose body fat, was to reduce cortisol. That was like, if your cortisol levels were high, you're not going to build muscle. So everybody just lost their mind, completely lost their mind, and thinking, oh, I can't do anything. I can't get stressed. I can't do anything. And they went to this kind of extreme level of trying to reduce the cortisol. But actually, cortisol is energy. I mean, would you kind of say that's what it is? I see it as the energy hormone. And what I want to ask you about actually is the cortisol response, because I love that graph that you've got on your email. By the way, definitely sign up to Bernie's emails, where in the bottom of your emails you had this graph of cortisol response. Would that be a fair kind of example? That's cortisol is the energy hormone, or would you say?
Yeah, no, I think more and more recently, cortisol is being given such a bad rap. Um, it's easy to do that. It's marketable, and because of the algorithms, because of the work I do, I talk about stress a lot of the time. So you can imagine I'm bombarded with ads and promotions around buy this supplement, do this, and then recently it's been relentless around get rid of cortisol face, cortisol belly, this, buy this supplement, detox from cortisol. And I'm like getting more and more angry because let's just strip it right back. Yeah, you're right. We've given it a bad rap. When I was doing my lifestyle medicine master's, it was in preventive cardiology. And the way I'll describe the way we're looking at cortisol now, I liken it to how we kind of looked at cholesterol in the 90s and the early noughties, it was just demonized, right? Everyone was like, cholesterol's so bad, like cut all the fat out of your diet, go low fat, and everyone was obsessed with get rid of cholesterol.
Don't eat eggs.
Don't eat, God forbid you eat an egg, right? So much cholesterol in it. So, and what we lived and started to see through the research was people were turning up in A&E having cardiac arrests, but when they measured their cholesterol, it wasn't high per se. What was interesting was for some people, you could have a cardiac arrest in relation to your CRP or your inflammatory markers. So people who had high inflammation with low cholesterol were equally having a heart attack. And so what was happening was we had these correlations between high levels of cholesterol, because yes, you're more at risk of a heart attack with high cholesterol, but it's not necessarily causal. I mean, just because you've got high cholesterol means you'll have a heart attack. And we had this whole kind of thing around a fear of cholesterol. When actually, the way I was taught it, and we learned on that degree, and I'll never forget it, it's a bit like cholesterol is a bit like, blaming a fireman for the fire because they're at the scene of the crime, right? So in my view now, it's like someone has a heart attack, you take their bloods, cholesterol's high, cholesterol is the problem. So people stripped out of their diet and try to demonize and get rid of it. In the same way, if you measure the cortisol responses from stress, the cortisol is going to be high. No shit. I think they're stressed. And yet we go, cortisol is the problem. It's a correlation. People with high levels of stress will have high levels of cortisol. Because as you say, cortisol is a hormone that acts in response to a demand. So cortisol is there, much like cholesterol, to do a job. Right? Cortisol is there because we have experienced something that calls upon us to have an activation of our respiratory system. We need to breathe more. We need to get away from something dangerous. So we need muscle activation. We need a nervous stimulus response. We need to move our body in a musculoskeletal system. We need to then revert away from digestion or reproduction. So there is a neurological nervous system response to a demand. That could be an email. That could be a bus that you didn't see come around the corner and you've got to respond quickly. So what happens is when our body or our brain receives that message that there's a demand, within milliseconds, we have a release of adrenaline, noradrenaline, okay? It's the natural autonomic response. You don't even know about it. You'll feel it. I mean, I don't know about you, but I quite often have it if, a pigeon ran out in front of me this morning. I had to brake really quickly, and I can feel tingles in my fingertips, right? It's the adrenaline. You're like, oh my God, I need to kill the pigeon. And then it's gone away again. Once that goes away, if that stressor persisted, cortisol begins to rise. So this is where cortisol comes into play. So that's released a little bit less quickly than adrenaline and noradrenaline. And it's released from the adrenal glands. And its main purpose is to sustain my response to that threat. So if that threat or that demand doesn't go away, I need energy. So I need energy to quickly turn the wheel. Had I knocked over that said pigeon and I wanted to get out of the car and move the pigeon, save its life, whatever I needed to do, I would need a musculoskeletal response and the heart rate would go up and my breathing rate would go up, right? And cortisol plays that role because cortisol's role is to deliver energy by activating stored glycogen from the liver. So it is there for a reason. There's a correlation between cortisol and the stress response because in order to respond to stress, we need energy. And cortisol is the predominant communicator for that because it helps us to get access to the glycogen, which we need from a cognitive point of view in our brain because it's the primary source of energy very, very quickly, but also musculoskeletal. We need that energy. And that's where we're missing that, because if we eradicate cortisol and we do cortisol detox, lo and behold, we're gonna come into some metabolic problems. We're not going to have that system at hand.
I've seen the graph you mentioned about the cortisol responses.
Yeah.
And I've heard about this before and read about it myself, but it's right that cortisol spikes in the morning, and that's essential. It's kind of why we wake up, isn't it? Like we need that rising level of cortisol to wake up, otherwise you wouldn't wake up.
Yeah, so there's something called the cortisol awakening response, or CAR for short. And it works on a 24-hour diurnal cycle or rhythm, which basically means over 24 hours, we're pretty rhythmic about how we release cortisol. Whether you want it or not, it's going to be there for us, as you say, to wake up. So essentially what it would look like, a normal cortisol response will rise and fall throughout the day. And there's incredible description about this. You can find in my work, but Andrew Huberman recently released a post on his Instagram, and people can go and find it, where he talks through the cortisol awakening response quite well. And Andrew Huberman's podcast, people are sure, I'm sure they've heard of. He's a neuroscientist at Stanford. So this isn't new science. It's always been there. And we're tapping into it more to help people to understand why we shouldn't demonize cortisol. And what it basically describes is about 30 to 40 minutes before we wake up, we have a natural release or rise in cortisol. So it gives us energy. And people might think, well, I don't really need cortisol that early in the morning. Well, let's think about it for a second. If you've ever been ill or tired, or you've been in hospital or bedridden for a while, you know that first kind of like, you've been in bed all day, and that first moment you get out of bed and you stand up and you might have a bit head rush, or you feel a bit weak. You think, oh, I'm all right. And you have had a virus. And by the time you get to the bathroom, you're like, oh my God, I'm so tired. Like, even that takes so much energy. That's because when we're fit and healthy and well, we don't even realize how much energy we're using just to wake up in the morning, to go to the bathroom, to do whatever we're doing. It's quite a significant amount of energy. We have to get our blood pressure up to homeostatic or optimal standing levels. Heart rate has to go up, etc. We need energy to perform the tasks of the day. So cortisol's preempted that. So as soon as, ideally, as the sun rises, we will receive those messages through our eyelids. Sun is coming up. Cortisol will start to rise. Now, of course, in winter, really, really hard to do. And that's where things like light clocks and alarm clocks. I use a Lumi clock myself. So the light will come on in the morning. I don't use an alarm clock. And I will naturally start to wake because I'm encouraging my cortisol to rise. That will peak within about 30 minutes of you waking. So by about 30 minutes, you'll have a natural rise and you should feel awake. Most of us will feel like that, right? It might be a bit groggy, a bit grumpy. I am definitely one of those people in the morning. Don't talk to me until I'm fully awake. And then I'm like, game on. At that point, it should naturally reduce as the day goes on, being at its lowest just before you go to bed. So that moment where you're watching telly, for me, it's just about 9:30, 10. I'm such a, old woman these days. And you start to feel a bit tired. What happens is cortisol is at its lowest. And if cortisol is at its lowest, it means melatonin can go up. So we want high cortisol in the morning, low cortisol in the evening, because then melatonin can kick in, which is the sleep drive, and it allows us to feel sleepy. Then we go to sleep, and as we sleep off melatonin, cortisol will start to rise again, and that pattern continues. That is where we're trying. If I'm thinking about working with my clients, fundamentally, they don't always know that, but that's what I'm trying to work towards. Because if you think about it, as humans, we mess that system up. Because yes, if we didn't have jobs and careers and lives and no life stress, right, we could wake up, we could meditate, we could do all the things, and our cortisol will come down. I don't know people who've got kids, but my kids start dicking about around bedtime.
They've got this thing inside, haven't they? I get to they're fine, and it's like, okay, it's bedtime, and all of a sudden they just go absolutely nuts.
Yeah, and that's me, like by far the most stressed part of the day. And so, yeah, we all have stresses where we should be winding down, but we think about kids and the routines. We had this bedtime routine, we had in the night garden, we do all these lovely things, and now they're like, my kids are 13 and 11, they're like, let's party, So we mess it up. We have blue light on our phones, or looking at the telly. We're like stubborn like me sometimes, think, well, it's 9:30 and they just go to bed. I want another couple of hours just to exist in the world without kids, and just have a life. But then I'm going to bed 2 hours later, so my cortisol's still up, so we mess it up. So the challenge for me, or the challenge for most people, is not to be perfect. It's not always possible, but to just think on balance. Am I doing things to inhibit or to sabotage that cortisol awakening response continually? And if you're perpetually doing that, you're increasing the risk of a chronic stress response, constant little spikes of cortisol throughout the day. And what we then see is a flat line of that cortisol awakening response. So, you can do blood tests. I burnt out in 2016, which was part of my story that lead me to this work. And it was one of the reasons why I recognized I needed to stop. I went, knowing my background, I had a degree in biology, and I understood that I knew there was something going on. I was like, if I could just measure, I need to understand my cortisol. So I did a cortisol awakening response blood test. And my profile was just ridiculous, so it got flat lines, and it explained my exhaustion, lack of energy. Remember we talked about the cortisol being responsible. So what we're really trying to do is just help people to return to that as best we can.
So do you find, because I want to touch on the burnout, because I think that's such a good topic, and it's something I've experienced, you've experienced as well. I know a lot of people who listen to this will have experienced it as well in some fashion. But just want to come back a little bit to that stress response of cortisol, the cortisol response. You mentioned before about when people are waking up and they're feeling kind of groggy. If that person was to do some, like if you elevate cortisol as fast as you can in the morning, would that help you sleep better on a night time?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So in principle, yes, that's a short answer, and that's what Andrew Huberman recommended in his recent post about it, and in his podcast, which I haven't listened to, and he probably goes into a significant amount of depth. But my caveat is, as a clinical practitioner that works in the real world with real people, I have a caveat to that. So the answer is yes. In principle, we want people's cortisol to rise, as quickly as possible. You could argue that things that would help that would be exercise, right? Especially high intensity exercise, of course, and caffeine. So caffeine will increase cortisol. And so my caveat to that is yes, if that individual is not already chronically stressed. So if you're balanced and fit and healthy and well, and you're, got life stress like everyone who hasn't, but you've got good recovery and you're managing that well. And if you're tracking your maybe data, and we'll get onto that perhaps in a minute, but people are often there using biotech to monitor their stress and their body battery, blah, blah, blah. If you know you're feeling well, and you can use a subjective guide for that, energy wise, I'm feeling good. Most people have a good intuitive feel for how they are. Then yes. If you're feeling rubbish, like your energy levels are flatlining, you're just really struggling, you're living on caffeine to function, you're not quite getting that recovery from your training, it helps in the moment, you get that psychological kind of benefit, but you're sluggish or even find it hard to get to sleep after a training session. So if you're chronically stressed to have that in your system, then my practice is to be careful about overexposing people to cortisol at that point. Because we don't want to add too much, which then pushes them into a state where they're chronically elevated cortisol. So it's not coming down because it goes up, and then their day is so stressful, so it's not coming down. So we've got to think about exercise prescription in a very nuanced, in science we call it N=1. So I guess what I'm saying, that real sit on the fence scientific approach, which is it really does depend, which is what I love about science. We can easily find a research paper to back up the claim to say yes.
Yeah.
But in the real world, real humans that I work with, you have to take it case by case.
I think that's great because I do listen to a lot of Andrew Huberman and stuff. I like his stuff. It's kind of the thing. I actually start listening. We start talking about neuroplasticity. Like, I'm obsessed with neuroplasticity. I just love it, the concept of it. But anyway, I started listening to his podcast because of that, and I've learned quite a bit from that. But I do my own research outside of that. But what you're saying there is, and I think that's the key part, when people are listening to things like this, it's like, okay, this is what I have to do. And it's like, no, this is what the science says. Okay, the science is great. It gives us a framework. But what we really need to do is we need to actually apply this to your individual life. And I think that's where the context lost. That's the part that's missing when we've got all of this information outlined. There's a lot of good stuff out there, but does it apply to your life? Does this fit in with your life? Do you have a different approach? You can use it by all means. But I do like what you said there about if that person is chronically stressed, because that for a lot of people, they are chronically stressed and they might not realize it. And I suppose this is what kind of brings us into burnout.
Mm-hmm.
So, because there's two things. You mentioned something, I wanted to touch on this as well. I thought it was brilliant when I heard it. Hadn't heard it before. Had spoken about it, but not how you framed it. But what is burnout? Like, what do people need to know about burnout? So I've been burnt out. I think I've been burnt out twice now. Two totally different reasons, but two experiences, two totally different experiences I know you have as well. So just for anyone listening to this, because one of the phrases that gets branded around a lot is tired and wired.
Yeah.
And that is a common thing that people say. So could you just tell us what burnout is and just like give us a bit of a picture of it?
Try and be concise. So for me, it's coming back, I guess, where it started for me. I've been delivering lectures about burnout since 2001. So I started my career as a lecturer in 2001, and I think it was like one of my first years of lecturing as a PhD student. The part of your PhD strip is we do undergraduate lecturing. And I remember I was teaching a sports psychology module, and one of the lectures was burnout. And I still remember to this day some of my slides. I can visualize them. I can see the lecture theatre I'm in, and I was thinking, this is really relatable. We, in our sports science degrees, would have a lot of athletes, and it was really pertinent to them. So the burnout would be in that world would be very synonymous with overtraining. So it's a sense of exhaustion and overwhelm, but really, back in the day, it was only really linked to, occupational health, athletes, and the army. So all of the literature is looking at where
So like because of the physical demand.
physical demands of it, and also the sense of feeling trapped, kind of locked into a career or a job where you put so much energy, time, and effort into it, and you're not getting the performance output, and you start to burn out psychologically, and there's some physical aspects to it. Fast forward to 2016, when I would say I burnt out, I remember just feeling so broken and exhausted. And just to give a bit of context, I had two young kids. My eldest is just out of primary school. My youngest was about 16 months, something like that. And I was working part-time as a lecturer. I was running a health and lifestyle clinic within the university. So we were taking patients from our local borough GP practices. So we were running a lifestyle clinic. I was doing that on kind of like my own time as such. And I was also training for marathons and ultramarathons because that was my kind of downtime, right? That was my therapy, in inverted commas, for those that are not watching online. Because I love to run. It was time away from the kids. I love my kids dearly, but it's just the only bit of time I had, and I loved to run. And I broke, and I was so exhausted. And I remember having a conversation with Paul, my husband, and going, I'm tired. He's like, yeah, I'm tired. You know, that argument you have with the other half. And there's no way any man, God bless you all, but we're always going to win that conversation. We're like, he's like, no, I'm tired. I was like, no, you don't understand. I'm broken. And that made me kind of go, hang on a minute. You're fit, you're healthy, you're training, you don't drink, you don't smoke, you're running decent times, performance hadn't dropped. Just for context, I had my second child, my periods had returned, I had no amenorrhea, so I was not overtrained, but I was broken. Went to the GP, they were like, you're depressed. I was like, I agree, I'm broken, feel something's wrong, but there's more to it. I'm not just more than this, like I'm just wired but tired, I'm anxious, and they were like, fast forward, they sent me to occupational doctor at the university, so like, I think I need some time off, and they were like, burnout doesn't exist. Now this was 2016. It wasn't until 2019 that the World Health Organization defined burnout, where I get to your answer, which is prolonged exhaustion and fatigue and depletion, and it's psychologically experienced and linked to your job or your performance role. So the World Health Organization did not define it. I was 2 years too early to get a clinical diagnosis from an occupational health GP. It comes about where you then feel detachment. So the second part of burnout is you feel detached from your role, or a deep sense of depersonalization from your job, something that you love. And that was so true for me. Like, I couldn't believe my luck at 21, 22. I was being paid to talk and teach about stuff I loved. I was training, like sort of like an athlete, surrounded by the university I worked at was a center for elite endurance athletes at the time. So you had this lovely environment of like, have I got the dream job or what? Started to feel a little bit disconnected, and then just kind of demotivated in that sense. So I could tick all the boxes, but there was more to it. And that's for me where I was like, okay, but what about the physiology? Because even with me delivering all these lectures, talking about the benefits of physical activity for mental health, I was justifying my lifestyle with all of the research that says exercise improves our mental health. I could have given you a literature review. So when I'm training and feeling exhausted, I was like, yeah, but the research proves it's good for my mental health. Not joining the dots. I had a degree in biology, you know, I was doing a PhD in stress and anxiety and elite performance at the time. And I couldn't join the dots. The occupational health doctor didn't join the dots. And so it was then I was like, okay, I need to figure this out. I did a cortisol awakening response test and I was like, okay, that's all I needed to know. I could see there was a physiological component to why I was feeling broken. And at that point is when I realized I need to stop. So I was very blessed to be in a position I could take time off work, and I did that and threw myself into the right people, got myself a coach, running coach, said, look, I'm going to do this. I want to train, but I'm going to do it with something called heart rate variability. And she was like, what's that? So we worked together. I was like, look, I'm going to track my heart rate variability. I'm burnt out, but I need to train. How do I train to this ultra? And we did it off 2 or 3 runs a week. She's an incredible coach, Karen Weir, give her a shout out. And we worked together and we learned how to train according to my body and not according to a training program. So burnout can be managed with exercise. It's a huge passion of mine, but when we do it correctly. And learning burnout doesn't need to mean you're broken. Burnout can be a red flag to mean you're not getting enough recovery, because fundamentally that's what we're saying. Burnout is your inability to bounce back because you've lived months of chronic stress, usually somewhere in the region of between 1 month to 6 months. The jury's out. But the more chronically stressed you are, you're increasing your chance of burnout.
Love that, because a lot of people will say, I remember there's this girl online and she said she'd been writing emails for like 2 weeks and she'd burned out, and she made this big song and dance for being burned out after 2 weeks. And I was just like, that's not what burnout is. Yes, you're tired. You've done 2 weeks of emails. I get it. You've been up probably 14, 15 hours. That's kind of not what burnout is. What you described there about how people feel, I think that's the most important part, as you mentioned, depersonalization. So are you talking about, is that, so you're doing a job that you love, you just then fall out of love with that work, and or whatever it is? It could be exercise, it could be a work, it could be whatever that is. Is that what you kind of mean by that?
It's just a detachment, you just kind of like, not bothered. And that wasn't you, that sense of like,
you kind of lose your spark.
Yeah, lose your spark and lose your drive, like really struggle to kind of care. When you do the bare minimum, you're like, I'll get through, it's like, whatever, I'll just get on with it. And that's not you. And that for me was a red flag. I love my work, I love my job. You probably say I've got a lot of energy what I do now. And as soon as I start to feel tired or a little bit like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm doing the right kind of, having too many coaching clients and stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay, you need a break. So it's starting to, for me, it's a very early red flag of, oh, you're starting to lose that little bit of spark, you need a rest. Just to come back to your point, I think this is a really good point around the vernacular of how we're using the word burnout in life. I think what we're now seeing is there's a lag in the research around different types of burnout. So the burnout I just described there would be, I guess, occupational burnout, but also clinical burnout, because clinical burnout then is that underlying metabolic shifts and changes. The degree to which people experience that is wide and varied. So men and women will experience it differently because it affects hormones differently. But you can actually have, and I'm not ashamed to admit this, I've probably burnt out ever so slightly since. And I say ever so slightly, it's not an ego thing. I'll just explain what I mean, because it links back to that maybe that girl who was talking about emails. Is what we're seeing in the literature now is a discussion around different types of burnout in the lens of, for example, neurodivergent burnout. We've got, we might have parental burnout. We've got relationship burnout. And there's lots of literature in and around these kind of systems or these kind of components, which is really fascinating and interesting to me. I think it's really interesting. Now, if I take, for example, neurodivergent burnout, I'd say at least 50% of my client base would be either autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, and they may be self-diagnosed or diagnosed. And what we're noticing I'm seeing in clinical practice, but it's kind of starting to be backed up with the research is that is very, very different, or presenting differently from clinical burnout per se in the general population, meaning it can happen quite quickly. That person might not identify you described as neurodivergent in any way, shape or form, but what we're seeing is it's a type of burnout that can happen relatively quickly because of the degree to which those individuals can hyperfocus. They can be really embedded in a project of work for 1 to 2 weeks, to the extent that which they maybe don't eat. They work through the night. I've got clients who will work to 3 or 4 in the morning. They don't even stop to go to the toilet, perhaps. They're so intensely involved in that thing. They then, and something they love, right? And then we get the switch of zero motivation, completely detached, because they completely run out creative energy. And what we then see is this, again, a terrible impact on their neurotransmitters. So that's just absolute night for dopamine and adrenaline, noradrenaline for ADHD type clients. So we can get, we need more research, but there's quick boom and bust in certain people. The good news is, what I've seen in clinical practice or in practice for me, is they can recover quite quickly as well. So it's usually take away sensory stuff. So someone who's neurologically or neurodivergent burnout, experiencing someone who's got neurodivergent burnout, in my experience, is a tell is often really hypersensitive to everything, to the point they have to shut down. So they might take to their bed for a day or two, but then they bounce back. So a whole weekend of low noise, fueling properly, sleep, put all of the recovery back in, take the strain off their nervous system so that their body can recover. And usually by Monday or Tuesday, they're back in the game. And so I've been working more closely with my clients to facilitate that, because that's how they're wired. If I kind of try and go, well, you can't hyper-focus and you can't work in that way, that's stressful to them, because that's how they're developed. That's how they're wired to work. So it's about, even in athletes, there's more and more research coming out in ADHD and autism in athletes, which I'm loving seeing. Josie Perry's written a book recently, highly recommend people read it, about ADHD in sport. When I did a PhD, nobody talked about neurodivergence in sport. And you kind of tell me there's no athletes with ADHD or autism. And so we're starting to see this body of work and research, and there's a huge overlap with burnout and stress. Again, that's from my practical experience. It's not to say I'm definitively correct in any of that, but I'm seeing that. So it maybe explains why some people might be saying, I feel burnt out. It's just that it might be different types.
I find that so interesting, because what you're kind of saying there, especially when you're talking about like ADHD and autism, is it then something to do with dopamine? Is it to do with like a depletion in dopamine? Because we know that like ADHD is linked to dysregulation in dopamine, isn't it? But when the ADHD brain can get hyper focused, they literally just, that's it, and you can't pull people away. But then does that dopamine levels just sort of sink well below baseline, and then they become detached, because they almost become, well, it's like depression, isn't it? It's almost, you get that feeling of depression when dopamine comes right down.
Or crash, yeah.
Like, I think dopamine is such, where it's one of the most important hormones that it does get spoken about, but I think it's spoken about in the wrong context. But we're talking about getting focused and having that energy, like whatever that is, then dopamine plays a huge role in that. So, I mean, like I see, the NHS is notorious for burning people out. Now, if you talk to someone in the NHS, they'll all tell you the same story. Love the jobs. They love caring for people. What they hate is the what comes from above. Basically, they're not allowed to do their job. It's not so much they get overworked, it's when they have these restrictions. So almost that motivation, that motivation just drops, because they what's the point? And then you've got like all these NHS staff who are fantastic at what they do, but they're just getting absolutely ruined. And would that be a fair assessment to say that it is something to do with dopamine?
Yeah, there's loads neurologically, and I'm not even going to try and be a neuroscientist with this, because I'm still learning, but yeah, there's a huge connection there, right? We know that dopamine is necessary for optimal function, and finding our right amounts can be really, really difficult. It's not that people with ADHD can't get dopamine. They often have lots of dopamine availability. It's the ability for dopamine to cross those neurotransmitters. So to kind of, if you've got two neurotransmitters connecting, it has to jump across, right? People with ADHD need a hell of a lot more dopamine than a neurotypical, for example, in order to facilitate that neurological transfer across the brain, right? Which means they have to seek it. They have to go out and find this dopamine, and it's kind of colloquially called dopamine mining. Now, if you think about it for a second, if you're perpetually going after a sense of that high, and your reward status is higher than the general population, that's exhausting. So it might be exercise you need, in inverted commas. It could be work. People get dopamine off their work. Anything where there's a sense of reward or completion, and it can be food, it can be sex, it can be gambling. There's a high rate of addiction in individuals with ADHD because they're perpetually seeking the levels of dopamine which are surpassed the amount that neurotypicals need, because just to function optimally, just to get through the day. And so almost as a byproduct of that, they are then exposed to chronic stress. And this is where in the neurodivergent world is people are at more risk of chronic stress and burnout, not because they're weaker, but just because by design, the world in which they exist in, they have to seek stress in order to get dopamine. And equally, the world is harder to navigate for them. So the simplest of tasks, which is maybe paying their tax bill, getting the kids out the door, all those executive functioning tasks, they're really, really difficult and stressful. And so by default, on waking, sensory and just making life decisions and planning, all of that already has their cortisol high. So there's so many multifactorial components to neurodivergent burnout, which makes it easier for individuals like that to burn out almost weekly, in some cases, my clients.
Do you think job satisfaction plays a big role in that? Because then if you do have, say you do have ADHD and you are in a job that doesn't really give you much joy or satisfaction or stimulation, you're going to struggle in that job, right? Like say for example, if you're sitting there and you're doing spreadsheets all day, actually you just want to do this creative thing.
Yeah.
And, you just want to write blogs or whatever that it is. Like you're going to feel trapped, aren't you? You're going to feel almost boxed in. And I imagine that would be a huge part of why people become
quite depressing, isn't it? And they need to seek it elsewhere, but they probably wouldn't last long in those kind of jobs, right? And quite often, I've had clients describe to me just the fact that their brain never stops. That in itself is exhausting, and that affects their blood sugar. They seek sugar, they seek glucose. They're reaching out in the afternoon, caffeine, coffee, alcohol, energy drinks, anything they can get. They don't realize is to get that high, that sugar fix, that dopamine hit. So it's metabolically disarming. It's coming at them at many different angles. So it can be a mess. And like I said, I think it's really important that we get this information to practitioners and people, because whilst in the textbook, we will have biological rules and systems in play about how the body works, right? Great. I love it. I was in my background's in biology and I love that stuff. But we're still learning. There's so much we don't know about the stress response within specific populations. Women, again, another population. Looking at athletes, how their body responds. We've got some literature and research to show that they are more likely to be have a protected effect against stress.
women are.
No, women are more risk athletes. Trained athletes are more likely to have a protected effect. And that links us back to the idea that that's why we promote exercise, right? So we can go, well, it's really good. You can, and it's banded as hormetic stress or good stress. So if we think about people saying, well, being an athlete, being trained exposes you to good stress and it can help you to be resilient. You then take an ADHD brain or an autistic brain or a neurodivergent brain, and then they go, exercise is my thing. I've seen and witnessed, and I've worked in an eating disorder clinic, along with the likes of Nikki Key and Rena McGregor, some incredible people at the top of their field, and learned from them that we need a multifactorial approach and an individual approach to these people. Because whilst, yes, exercise might help people, like I said, if you put that recipe on top of a broken system, we just see a metabolic mess, effects on the reproductive system and bone health and all sorts of things. So yes, we have to remember the biology and the research is only as good as the population or the sample in it. You will struggle to find research on women around stress and exercise and burnout. You will really struggle to find research that has even considered to ask that population of those samples, have they got ADHD or have they got undiagnosed autism? Often those people might not know. So we really muddy, in my experience. Now, I've been out of research for now 8 years. I'm hoping to go back in and collaborate with some research projects on this very stuff. But what we're seeing and what I think is if we have to be very cautious and careful of translating those research studies to the individual in front of me. If I've got Kira in front of me and you say, oh, I've got ADHD and I've had 2 kids, and I've had a history of, I don't know, going on low carb diets. Well, I'm going to struggle to find a piece of research that includes men your age with that history within an ADHD neurological setup. So can I apply that science to you? No. I can lean on it a bit. What I try and do is go, let's see. And you start to build this relationship with your clients and with your cases to kind of go, we err on the side of caution, we underprescribe, and we monitor. Let's try this, see how your body responds. And your body becomes the tool and the educator. I, as a coach, you as a practitioner, we learn from the people we work with, because their bodies are going to respond differently. And it will take me a month, 2 months, 3 months to get to know my clients. I'm sure it's the same for you in the gym floor, right? We have these textbooks and these theories of movement planes and plans and stuff. Back in the day when I was a personal trainer, yeah, great, it's all brilliant. And then John walks in and he's had a hip replacement, and you kind of go, oh, chuck that textbook out the window. Let's just see what you can do, and we'll just make it up from there, right? That's what we need to do. We need that kind of fluidity, and yes, we need to understand it, but we have to be willing to kind of learn as we go, I think.
No, that's brilliant. 'Cause I think most of my learnings have come from that exact example. You're given the tools, like, okay, this is how you lose fat, this is how you build muscle, blah, blah. And then you do get somebody coming in and they've only got one leg, and you're like, right, I've not done this one before. Okay, let's just do some stuff and see what happens. And that's what you've got to do, isn't it? And I think that's where the research can almost be explored, I would say, especially in these areas that aren't widely available, like ADHD and burnout. I think I am quite envious of the fact that you are going to be doing some research on this, by the way. I think
but you know what? We're actually, I think even more so now, like, I think, God, 8 years ago, I started using something called heart rate variability monitoring then, right? But to take what you just said there, I think right here, right now, for trainers and practitioners, there's never been a time where we have access to biotech readily in our hands that we can use relatively cheaply to track and monitor our clients. I don't think we should be held hostage to it, but we should lean on it and use it as a learning tool. I think AI can be a part of that. I think we shouldn't be scared of that as practitioners. It's how we use it. And blood metrics, like when I work with my clients, I use something called a diagnosis of exclusion, which is simply put, like, I make no assumptions that somebody comes to me is chronically stressed or burnt out until I've decided, or not me, but a doctor, because we send them all to do blood tests, has excluded other reasons why they might be chronically fatigued. It could be anemia, it could be a thyroid problem. There are many clients that I will refer back to, people like Rena McGregor, Nikki Key also I'll refer clients to, because it's above my pay grade and above my clinical expertise. I have an inkling. We'll send them off, we do some blood tests. If they come back with a nutritional deficiency, that's what we will look at first. There's no amount of lifestyle coaching or mindset work that I can do with them that's going to bring their iron levels off the floor or right and lower thyroid problem. That's where the clinicians come in. And I think that's where multidisciplinary approach to the work that we do is know our scope of practice. I'm really strict with that. I have a good idea, but I always go out and I've got some really good people I work with to go, what do you think? And 9 times out of 10, they'll go, yeah, keep doing what you're doing. This is right. Actually, you missed this bit. They need to take this medication. I'm like, awesome. And we work together. And I think now it's never been more accessible, because back in the day, you wouldn't be able to just write an email to a consultant and get feedback or see their stuff online on social media. Like, people are accessible now. So rather than working in silos, which I hate and I don't want to do, part of my building stress set is to bring brilliant people like yourself in and create communities where we have people who are willing to kind of go, I don't know, because the research isn't there, but I'm really have this inkling and this is my experience. We share practice and we learn from each other, because, as you say, the research isn't quite there, but that's exciting because we get to try and unpick it and unpack it. So I think now is a really exciting time for our industry. If we do it right, you can get it massively wrong if we can't be arsed and we just think there's one way. But I think by being open to learning it, I think there's huge potential to get more help for more people.
I agree. I think, it is an exciting time for the industry. Like for myself, connecting with people like you and Dr. Nikki K and all the other people, because I think you can almost become a little bit overwhelmed with everything that you are dealing with. You could have a client who has this, and this. You're like, oh wow, like I've got this inkling, but it's can put a lot of stress on you and put a lot of expectations on you as a person. But you've got that person, you say, oh, actually, I'm in this group or I'm in this cohort of people that can go and ask this expert, I can ask that expert. And to me, that's how you build a good coaching practice. I know we're not really talking about coaching practices on here, but I think for anybody who's deciding on taking a coach or a personal trainer or anything like that, these are the things that we should be considering. Because
And looking for coaches themselves. Like, I think for me, a red flag is always anyone who claims, and I know you'll believe in this, that anyone who claims to have an answer, red flag. Like anyone who definitively says, I can fix you. You're burnt out, I can fix you. I like to think I've got enough experience. I think I can help people. Never claim that I can fix anybody, because really the fixing and where it comes from them. We can facilitate and direct and guide, bring our expertise. But anyone who says I've got a 10-step plan and I can fix you and make this happen is just a red flag, because they can't. No one can, right? It comes down to the individual. They fix themselves. So I think it's really important that we have that kind of, looking at coaches who are willing to look outside themselves and be part of networks and groups and have podcasts like you where you're like having conversations with people. I learned most of what I learned the last 8 years. I haven't just inhaled it and it's come in. Like it's like going back, trawling through all of the research papers and joining the dots and putting in a lot of work, to create or to bring it together. Still haven't got all the answers because the research isn't there, but I've got more questions, right? Which is great, because the more questions we have now, it's like, oh, okay, now we need to find out the answer to this. Okay, that's great. Who do we bring in to help us to do that?
I think, and what we have as tools, I think that's where I see myself as like, I've got these tools that I use. Some of them might work for you, some of them might not. And if my tools don't work, I'm going to go and find someone who maybe does have the tools that can help you. And I think that becomes a big part. We can do that. We can almost take, as practitioners, we can take that. Well, actually, these are just tools, and it's like I don't know, kitchen fitter. Fitting the kitchen is like, I don't have the right tools for that. I'm going to have to go and see my pal, who actually does these types of kitchens. He does have that tool,
and you'll get in an hour.
But you wouldn't think anything less of that person. You wouldn't think any less of that kitchen fitter because he didn't have the right tool. It was like, all right, you got to get the tool from somebody else. That's cool. Yeah. But when you're a practitioner, you think that you've got to have all the answers and I need to know everything. And I know as personal trainers, it's you. There's a lot of pressure. You do think you need to know everything, and
I think that comes from growth, doesn't it? Just kind of being able to go, okay, well, let's find out. Yeah, totally agree with you.
That's it. Touching on keeping on that burnout theme, I wanted to ask you about kids in school. It's my opinion that there's a lot of stress on kids at the moment with their exams and things. Can kids get burnt out? Can kids, well, especially when we talk about ADHD, we're in for it, that can definitely happen. But what about people who don't have ADHD? Can kids become burnt out? Is that something that we should be looking at?
Yeah, of course they can. I think, they're very resilient kids more than anything. Anyone who'll have kids or is listening will know, they get embarrassed, they bounce back, they're pretty good. But that said, they're also very vulnerable because they're still growing, they're still developing. And we are almost over-prescribing life to them, in my view. Like I said, I have 2 kids now, and a lot of the work I try and do is to moderate that and manage that, trying to strike that right balance of giving them stress exposure so they're not snowflakes and learn to be a bit resilient. So as a parent, that's really, really hard. Expose them to the right level of stress, but making sure they get recovery. So my eldest son, for example, he did his SATs a few years ago. He's in year 9 now. Pretty much sailed through it, very little stress. But the school he was at were incredible in that they started their preparation very, very early on in year 6. Some people might say, well, that was too much. But it was drip fed to the kids to the point where it was gamified and they became exposed to a test experience, which I don't agree with, by the way. I was brought up and educated in Ireland, and everyone's got their own belief systems, whatever, about education. So I talk to my sons about, listen, SATs are for school, SATs are for the government. If you're showing up, you're educated, and scores don't really particularly matter to you, right? We just go to school, we learn, we're not going to worry about that, and take the pressure off. And equally had those conversations. The school my kids go to, no, I do. I quite, I don't shout at them, but I make sure it's on my email headers and any communications with the school they know. So, they often ask me questions and are open to that. So I think we have to be aware that, we ask our kids to concentrate a lot. They're not having opportunities for much movement these days, daylight exposure. I know, for example, my eldest, who gets really chronic migraines, we had to have conversations with school with, he had to ask permission to have a drink of water. I mean, what's that about? I was like, he needs to be hydrated.
No.
So he needs his water at his desk. Well, we can have kids. Well, no, you do. He's having water at his desk. It's almost like illegal. So we have to start thinking about them as just like, yeah, what are we asking of their little bodies and their systems? And are we matching that with recovery? Yes, they can achieve a lot. There's huge potential for them to do so many different sports and activities and thrive these days. Great, do it. But our jobs as parents, is to balance that with sufficient fuel, sleep, recovery. And in some cases with our own kids, that might be saying no to certain clubs or homework or projects, or so that we can make sure we get that they're mentally and physically well.
Like one of the things I do with my kids, and we moved to a local village where their school is, and our house is about 10, 15 minutes away. 10 minutes if you're walking fast, 15 minutes. Half an hour if we've got the little one and she wants to walk. Because I'm, shy with it. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Come on, But every morning we walk to school, and it doesn't matter what time, whether we're late. Generally, we didn't get there. We got there 5 minutes late this morning. I just couldn't get the kids out of the house. You know what it's like when you've got the kids trying to get out of the house. I've got a 2.5-year-old around the house, refusing to put his shoes on. It's just, it can be carnage at times.
Yeah.
And I said, look, we're going to walk to school every single day. I don't care if we're late. We're going to walk to school. Because what I see, and this is what I hate when we didn't live here, what we do is we get the kids in the car, we pile them into the car, we're running late, we're getting stressed, we're sitting in the car, we're not getting sunlight. All of these like little things that add up, and then we're putting the kids into school, and they're coming in and they're kind of wired because of all of the stress beforehand. Now we walk to school, it takes us about 10, 15 minutes. The two boys have a conversation, they talk to each other. We don't rush, we just walk, we're getting some sunlight, and they get there and they're just nice and relaxed. And to me, it's just that, like, we're often late because just how life is at the minute. But at the minute, I'm just like, I can teach them time management skills later. I'm not too worried about that. What I'm worried about is them getting to school and arriving in school and feeling, they're getting a little bit of exercise. I think little things like that, to me, is what's missing.
But you're linking that with the cortisol awakening response. You're giving them a natural rise, daylight, movement. You're managing their energy and levels just before. So they're going into school having had an increase in blood flow to the brain, which gives them BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which means it's like brain fertilizer. So they're going in awake, alert, relaxed, and whether they're 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late, they're actually going in probably going to learn more than a kid who's on time and stressed.
Well, that's the thing, and they're desperate to get kids there for 8:45 now instead of 9 o'clock because lockdown, we had to, obviously they missed a lot of school, so they're trying to cram these 15 minutes in. And it just, that to me just doesn't make any sense when you're talking about learning. It just, that does not how learning works. But yeah, it just, I think we can, as parents, we are limited to what we can do when they're at school. But I think, we can do things outside that could maybe alleviate a lot of stress on them. Just little things like walk to school with them.
100%.
If we can.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I volunteer in my son's primary school. When in lockdown, I used to do a group. It was adults. It was called Run Well. I loved it. I just had to make a decision to, my business. You can't do everything, right? But Run Well was running for wellness. It was mums and dads who would come, and we would run. I wouldn't care about their PBs at times, nothing. It was mobility. It was running, and it was run to feel, ask them to take over the devices, and it was running for wellness, and absolutely loved it. And because I was doing it 2-3 times a week, I started to miss it. And I noticed at school, they weren't getting that level of physical activity. Yes, they had PE, but they were sitting a lot. And also, they were doing like sports like cross country and stuff, and they weren't preparing the kids. It became a stressful thing. So they're just handpicking the fastest kids to run 2K. I'm like, got a bit of a problem here. These kids, they might be fast, but 2K is a long way when you're like 9 or 10. So I volunteered, and we go in, and a couple of friends of mine, and we go in, and we have essentially the Run Well program, but we go in, and it's literally 8 o'clock, 2 days a week, and we get 40 to 50 kids turning up. Yes, the parents are like, great, it's an early drop off, get a bit of babysitting. But those kids love it. We just teach them about pacing, moving their body, as you say, with your kids. I make sure they're having a laugh. I want them to love running, not because they're being told to do 20 laps of the track, because that's not what running's about to me. There's kids who come who, you can tell they've been told they got to come, their parents are dropping them off and whatever. And by the end of it, they're signed up, they got a t-shirt, they're like, I want to come to the cross country. One little lad said to me one week, he's like, Bernie, I did 8 laps of 200-meter track, right? So, he's like, first time I came, I could only do 2, now I'm doing 8. And I'm like, that to me was just everything, because you should see these kids, they're going into class, they're respectful, they're energetic, and a lot of them have behavioral problems, but they're going in, they burned it off and they're ready to learn. And that's what it's about to me. It's about helping our younger generation to love physical activity and movement, because it makes them feel good, as opposed to, yes, you have to do it, or it's something that's like a chore.
I think that's key there as well, Lynn, because like we mentioned like dopamine before, but it's my understanding that when you do exercise you enjoy, like this is why I think, especially when I work with like order clients and things, it's like pick something that you want to do, as opposed to do something that the internet's told you to do. When you do exercise you enjoy, you actually release dopamine, don't you? You release dopamine through exercise you enjoy. Like for most people, like to walk. So if you're walking, you're going to naturally release dopamine. If you're doing a little bit of running, but it's not overly competitive, there's no competitive side to it. You're just doing it for a bit of fun. You're adding some enjoyment to it, and you're giving them kids the benefits of that dopamine, isn't it? Aren't you? And when you start making exercise unfun, that's the problem, because it's like you're stripping these kids of the actual essential things that they need, things like dopamine. So they're getting dopamine, they're going to attach that. Oh, I like this. I want to do more of it.
Yeah, 100%. And that sets them up for life. I have parents that come to me, still later, the kids gone on to secondary school, and they give me little updates. So, such and such are in the cross country team and they're still running, and you made them love running. And I'm like, look, I didn't make them love running. They showed up, and we just create an environment where, listen, I'm competitive. I'm like, there's a secret part of me which is like, look, we're getting absolutely annihilated in every cross country, right? We're going to do this right. But we prepare them well, so they come and go to cross country. We finished 4th in the district, we were getting annihilated every year. And that to me was killing me, because I was like, to come back to the competitive kids, there were kids there with really good potential and talent, and they're turning up to primary schools and they're getting annihilated. They were losing hope, they were losing interest, they cared, they really wanted to compete. And I said, we got to strike the balance here. We invite everybody, and then the kids who are able to compete at that level, we give them the recipe to push them, and we push them, and it's all relative, and all of the sessions are set around, performing to their level so that they love it. And some of them work so hard, to the point where I'm like, you got to slow down. They're like, what? I'm like, teach them zone 2 or whatever, but they don't care. We call it nan running. I'm like, I want to see a nan running. They're like, oh, it's really boring. I'm like, I know, but we're going to do some laps of nan running. So just making it silly and fun, and remembering as parents, it's about longevity. We talked before we came on the call about seeing a significant rise in injuries in young children. And you just have to look at their timetables. You have to just look at what I'm talking about. Yeah, like they're doing more, but it's not high intensity or high volume. It's, as you say, fun. Because if you look at their timetables, most kids now, geez, like they're doing stuff after school 4 or 5 nights a week, and then they're competing at the weekends. So we've got to be really careful about how much volume they're doing, I think.
I mean, we've got girls in the gym at the minute, and bear in mind, young girls, they're more susceptible to injuries, just the way they kind of how they're developing, and the hormones and all that type of thing, and the anatomy. But you've got these girls who are like, they're competing Saturday and Sunday at high level games. You're talking like county level. It's very competitive. Then they're training 3 or 4 or 5 times through the week, all the same sport, nothing different. And it's just like, it's a disaster waiting to happen. And it's sometimes it's so hard to explain to the parents. It's like, look, it's at this age, it wants to be about the enjoyment. Yes, if they're competitive, great, get them in that competitive environment, because they thrive off that environment. But it doesn't have to be all of the time. Like, to me, if they compete on a Saturday and a Sunday, that for me, from experience, is too much at that age. It's like, pick one or the other, and then do some smart training throughout. Like, do some strength training, do some fitness training, do some recovery work. Like, emphasize the importance of recovery. I think recovery is just so underrated, because it's like kids are resilient and they can do a lot more volume probably than what adults can, but they still need that recovery more than anything. And if you can balance that out, they can train every day.
Yeah.
But
Right.
just
Like you say, recovered well and well fueled, I would add to that as well.
well fueled, yeah, absolutely. Fuel, yeah, absolutely essential, I would say. Recovery and fuel.
Yeah. And I think we run the risk of putting pressure on parents to be a bit like sports scientists. And this then also increases the risk of parents being overly marketed to. I think by creating this kind of a narrative and conversation around us needing to do that, I've even seen it myself. There's a significant rise then exponentially in providers who claiming to provide that. Come to us and we'll give your kids all these things. But actually, we can strip it back and it comes back to basics, come back to homeostasis, comes back to balance. It's like teaching your children the most basic things, which is, are you moving? Are you sleeping? Are you fueling appropriately? And it doesn't need to be quantified to death. Like that can create all these problems around exercise addiction, eating disorders, orthorexia, and that creates a whole different kettle of fish. So then that's where we have to strike that balance. So, my background, PhD in sports psychology, my husband has PhD in sports psychology as well. And we work in elite, we worked in background elite sport. We just take a real step back. One of my sons is he's in the development for county cricket. He's 13, so he's working quite well there. But we're looking out for professionals to help him for strength and conditioning, because he's at that age now where he needs that additional support for injury prevention. That's it. Because what we're seeing is peers, like you say, huge volume, doing lots of different things, but only specialize in one sport, perhaps. So he's now, I've said to mate, why don't you do some badminton? I mean, it's S&C, right? He's going to be running around, changing direction, explosive, or he doesn't know that that's what he's doing. But for his cricket, the transferability of doing that into that sport, like my husband's a cricket coach. So we were like, yeah, school have offered some badminton. Great, do that. Great crack, great fun. And he's going to get some headspace away from county cricket starting to get a little bit more serious. And we'll do some S&C stuff to teach him the basic fundamental skills of movement and, help him to look after his nutrition. But we take a step back. The rest of the time, we just kind of let him be a kid. And downtime, talking about recovery, I let him sleep in. I let him lie in at weekends. If anything, I always encourage him to stay in bed a bit longer. At 8 o'clock at night, he drives me mad. He's in the cupboards before he goes to bed. And I'm like, okay, we need to be putting in another meal here. So we're now putting in a meal. I say to him, right, kitchen closes at 7:30. What do you want? You got to make it yourself. So again, teaching accountability, you want a bagel, whatever. So recognizing his fuel demands are gone up. He clearly wants food before bed. Even I'm like, how could you be hungry? He clearly is. So it's that kind of thing. There's no counting the calories. We don't talk about, we just take a step back and respond to him. Is he getting enough sleep? He clearly wants more food. But okay, rather than him wanting a bowl of cereal or something crap before bed or biscuits, which he's like trying to get out of the cupboard, I'm like, right, have a bagel. So I really just think parents haven't got time. We're all stressed and overworked. We don't need to become sports scientists or nutritionists. Lean on a bit of common sense, be guided by our kids a little bit, and reach out to professionals for that little touch points of information that will help make a difference, I think.
It's brilliant. I love that. I think everything you've touched on there, because I think it can be really stressful being a parent, and you're looking online and you're seeing all these things, or you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, and you really don't know what you should and shouldn't be doing. And it's the case exactly what you just said there. Let them just lead the way, and then advise them. Instead of eating a biscuit, have a bagel. But a lot of them parents, oh, we shouldn't eat a bagel because bagels are really bad. It's like, bagels actually contain quite a bit of fiber, and they're giving the kids some nutrition. They're getting more carbohydrates from there, which is absolutely essential for the sport and recovery. Like, much better option than a biscuit. And it's like, and you don't have to say you can't have biscuits. It's a case of, actually, if you ate a bagel, this is what it's going to give you. And you can maybe give them a little bit of education on that, so they can make their own decisions.
Yeah. And that's empowering, isn't it? Because again, it's just like, I've seen enough of kids going the other way and, our parents ask me, like, should my son or daughter be taking protein shakes? And again, I'm not a nutritionist, dietitian. I direct them towards the right people. But I'm like, well, actually, if we're doing the right things, they shouldn't potentially need it. We can get all that stuff in the right places. There are times where clinically people will need that, and that's where I would always recommend children, especially because they're still growing and their needs are really important, that we work with dietitians to prescribe, whether it's protein or creatine, there's a whole thing online now. I've seen young kids talking about wanting to get creatine, again, the research isn't there. Like, who am I to tell someone what to do? So yeah, I think it's a minefield. But I always think, yeah, err on the side of caution.
I made an analogy to one of the kids in the gym because he's 14-year-old. He's asking us about creatine. And again, research is quite sort of, there's not much in there. And it's just like, should I take some creatine? I says, the likelihood is if you take some creatine, you'll be fine. You'll not get any side effects from it. I says, but this is where you've got to think about it. It says, your body's growing. And if you're developing quite quickly, okay? Let's say you're working at 200 miles an hour and you take some creatine, that may take you to 205 miles an hour. So it might give you a little bit of extra. But if you just let your body naturally do it and then grow past that stage, and then when you get a little bit older, then start taking protein, when your body starts slowing down a little bit, then, you are struggling to get to 205 and 210. Start taking the creatine then, and then that creatine's then going to take you to 220, 225. But let your body just develop first, build that strength up, and then start looking at supplements later on. But the way your body's growing at the minute, just go with it. You're getting stronger, you're getting faster, you're getting brilliant at football, you're getting scouted. Why change anything at the moment?
Yeah, it's really hard for them, isn't it? Especially with social media. They just bombard. And imagine what their algorithms are like. They're just getting fed it, aren't they? They're just getting fed ripped bodies and this, that, and the other. I can't even imagine what it must be like for these kids, that's a whole other conversation around social media and, how you keep your kids off it. But yeah, I think the way in which they're targeted with these messages is even worse than ever. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time today, Bernie. I think you've been absolutely amazing. There's so much information for parents, anybody else who's interested in the stress side of things. Before we shoot off, could you tell us a little bit about your stress ed and then where people can find you? This is your opportunity just to sell yourself a little bit.
Yeah. Well, yeah, people can find me at stressed.co.uk, so stress-ed.co.uk. What you'll find on there is, I take on very small, limited one-to-one clients now. So if people are chronically stressed or burnt out and anything we talked about related to them, you can find me on there, reach out, and I'll share my availability and one-to-one coaching services. Most of my energy is going into stress ed CPD training, building the training around that to educate professionals. So, what is a professional? Anyone working in the health and wellness space. And I've got some students coming on those courses who are just starting out. So they're like, I'm really interested in becoming a PT, but I want to learn this stuff too. You don't have to have pre-existing credentials. So if you're interested in getting a CPD accredited qualification in stress, chronic stress and burnout, the academic in me won't get away from the literature. It's level 4, meaning, I cover sort of like early stage of degree type level. But I do lean on some research and I share some science there, but I pitch it to the audience depending on who shows up. So if you're interested in learning more, you want to do some training, go there. If you want to learn and you don't want to do training, come to our website, you'll find some webinars. We're building our back catalogue of digital downloads, some blogs. We're striving to do a monthly webinar. I think our next one is on recovery, so look out for that one.
Nice.
Just as a 30-minute in the middle of the day, if you register, you'll get the recording. It's just to kind of start registering interest in the training we do, but help people to get stuff and get information to learn whether they're professional or not. And you can find me on Instagram. It's pretty much where I hang out these days, yeah.
Cool. Well, we'll put all the links into the show notes. So if anyone's listening to that, we'll give you the links to that. I would just like to reinforce the fact that if you are a practitioner, personal trainer, especially anything like that, then Bernie's CPD course will be absolutely instrumental in your development. And it looks great in your CV. It looks great when you're talking to clients. And ever since lockdown, I think stress has now become more talked about, which is great. And I think it'd be great for anyone's business, but also for helping your clients as well.
Cheers for that, Kira. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for your time today, Bernie, and maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Absolutely. I think chapter 2.
Chapter 2. I look forward to it.
No worries.